Synergy loves company.
We have this coterie of rich franchises, the company now, that people want to engage with.
I came here to try and continue what Walt Disney and his associates set in motion 50 years ago, which is to experiment with every new and innovative kind of entertainment possible.
It's what we hope to do here, to really develop something that, just more than an entertainment enterprise. It's something that contributes many other ways.
Hey, this is Synergy Loves Company, where we explore how Disney connects to everything. I'm Eric Hathorn, and keeping me company today is you, the listener. Thank you so much for listening. I don't have a guest today. I'm doing something a little different, so I'm kind of excited about this. I just got back from Walt Disney World, and this is usually where you would hear the podcasters say, oh, and I'm going to give a trip report. This is not going to be a trip report. This is something different. But I was kind of inspired by my trip to Walt Disney World. It's been a while since I've been there, so there were a lot of new things to do. Rise of the Resistance, Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, big new things to do. But there were also a lot of little new things to do and experience, different snacks and things like that. And even since we left about a week ago, I noticed all these things pop up on Twitter about, changes to the Carousel of Progress costumes and the narration in the People Mover and all these just little things halfway to holidays, celebrations, and special snacks for that made me think about how often Walt Disney World, Disneyland have small little updates and changes. And it really made me think about Walt. Now, when we were on the trip, we got to see things like the Progress City models, be reminded of things. Of course, I didn't get to see the utilidors, but I was reminded of the utilidors and all just kind of the new, different, innovative ways that people get around Walt Disney World. The monorails, the People Mover. I'm going to still say that people get around with the People Mover. And the Skyliner, the boats, everything like that. It just kind of has that kinetic awesomeness that Walt always kind of pushed for. So I couldn't help but be reminded of Walt Disney as we're around Walt Disney World, even though he really didn't get to have much of a hand in it other than initial planning. So I thought today what I would do is talk a little bit about synergy inside the company. So the show's called Synergy Loves Company. And so far I've been talking about Disney plus something else outside of the company. But Disney was really great at using synergy within the company too. So today on Synergy Loves Company, we're going to take a look at synergy, which of course is the combining of two completely separate entities where the output is greater than the original two parts. So like a 1 + 1 = 3 situation. I named the show this because I wanted to look at connections to Disney, but also here today, we're going to look at connections inside of Disney. The truth is that Disney really had a history of being great at using synergy inside the company, using different parts of the same company to promote each other and make them stronger. So that's what we're going to take a look at today, but we're specifically going to look within the company at Walt Disney. Walt Disney set the tone of using synergy for the company that would go on and kind of follow them throughout the years and kind of be one of those things that they were great at. But he is absolutely the one who started it. All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about Walt. So Walt Disney was an innovator. Some people would say that Walt was an inventor. I don't really think he was an inventor. I think he was an innovator. So innovation, he just would take things that were already pretty great and make them better. He was doing this all the time. I'm also going to say right now, before I get into this, people might be like, well, Eric, Walt Disney didn't do all that himself. Yes, I know. He didn't do anything all by himself. He always had a great team around him. And you could say he synergized with those people. He would bring the right people together to make his ideas stronger. We could look all the way back to the Oswald cartoons and the early Mickey stuff, and a lot of that was iWorks. But Disney was steering the company at that point. Walt was the one in charge, making those calls, and he knew that could do the work. So whether you think that's good that he kind of, worked with in the way that he did, or maybe I don't know, whatever you think about their relationship, he was the one steering the ship. And that's what I want to kind of look at today. So he's this innovator who's steering the ship of Disney, and he's surrounding himself with the best people, and he's always making things better. He didn't invent cartoons, but he did push them to the next level with everything he did. If you take a look at his Alice cartoons going into his Oswald cartoons, going into his Mickey cartoons, each time they're pushing the envelope of what these cartoons could do, what these animated shorts could do, taking the idea of adding real people. He wasn't the first to do it, but he did it in a different way with the Alice comedies. He wasn't the first to add sound to a cartoon, but he did it better than anyone else and made it more memorable than anyone else. So his work over time is always pushing the envelope, getting a little bit better. I would say that his best innovation is the synergy that he developed in the company. And I think to understand how Walt gets to his synergy and how he uses his synergy, we have to look at his relationship with his father, Elias. So when Walt was growing up, Elias didn't have a lot of money. They weren't a super rich family. Elias always had some sort of income stream. He was always very resourceful and found a way to make money for his family. He always seemed to provide for his family, but that's largely because of his own ingenuity. So Elias, I would argue, was a creative person. He wasn't creative in the same way that we would think of Walt as creative, but he was very creative and resourceful. And creative people often have many different interests, not just one focus. So Elias falls into this because he had this restless entrepreneurial style. He was always restless. He moved his family a lot. He started totally brand new, unrelated careers. And he kind of worked in a lot of different industries over the years. Before Walt was even born, Elias had been a farmer for his father. He worked on the railroad. He worked as a substitute teacher. And then right around the time Walt was born, Elias had moved to Chicago to help with construction on the World's Fair and built a bunch of houses at the time, some churches. He was a carpenter, a builder. He did all of those things before Walt was born. As they lived in Chicago and Walt was very young growing up, Elias got nervous about some crime that was happening in the big city and decided to move his family out to the country. And they go and find themselves in Marcelene, Missouri, the small town of Marcelene, where once again, Elias becomes a farmer. Now, this was kind of a 180 for the life of the Disney family. Walt goes from being very young in a city to, his formative years as a child in this small town rural community off the railroad, and it really shapes him. Walt will often call Marcelene his hometown, and we can see that he's really inspired by it when we look at things like Main Street in Disneyland and Walt Disney World, because those things are shaped by that small town life. Marcelene is Walt Disney's hometown. If you really look at it in a lot of the ways that he would kind of longingly talk about Marcelene and think about Marcelene, Marcelene is probably where Walt Disney would have liked to stay. He would have been perfectly happy if he could live his whole life in Marcelene. He probably would have said that. I don't know. I'm talking for Walt here. I'm not trying to talk for Walt. I just know that he had a very strong fondness for Marcelene. But of course, they couldn't stay in Marcelene forever, not just because of Elias's entrepreneurial spirit, his restless spirit, but because he gets sick and he can't manage the farm anymore. He moves his family to Kansas City. Kansas City is a little bit more like Chicago and not like Marcelene. And in Kansas City, he gets a paper route for his family to make money. And of course, the kids have to chip in and help out with the paper route. So Walt is now working. A little different than his life in Marcelene. But he's working, he's helping deliver papers. Once again, the Disney family is provided for. They have a job, they have an income stream, but it's not the same as what Walt really enjoyed back in Marcelene, he still longs for that place to be, that place he wants to belong. So from Kansas City, moving on, Elias has another opportunity, and he invests in the Ozell Orange Drink Company back in Chicago and moves the family back to Chicago. So you can see they're moving all around the Midwest at this point, trying new things, trying different ways that's maybe going to get the Disney family ahead. Elias is looking for these opportunities to get his family ahead. Elias is chasing these new opportunities and dreams, and at the expense of having to move his family quite often. This is all, up till Walt is a teenager, and he's moved to all these different places and experienced all these different types of American Midwestern life, city life, small town life, rural life. He's got it all. And he's lived all these different places and had all these different kind of jobs and family lifestyles throughout the years. So this is where I think we can start to see Walt's synergy developing. Now, when I say Walt's synergy, it's kind of like how he used synergy and where that comes from in his life, why he used synergy the way he did. And I think it kind of comes from convenience on some things that he develops at this point in his life. So two big things that help his synergy develop are having moved around as a child. Walt really craved more stability in his life. Like we talked about with Marcelene, I really think Walt would have loved to stay in one place, like Marcelene, for the long haul and kind of live out his years there. Now, I think he would say something like that, but I don't think he could have stayed there forever, because of course he has that restless spirit, which is the other thing that I think shapes his synergy. The same as his father there, he's got that restless spirit where he wants to keep creating new things. He wants to try new things. He wants to do different things. So these two things that he's developed because of his relationship with his father, one that's almost the same, his creativity, and one that's in opposition, his wanting to plant roots, are going to set up a lot of how he approaches his business and his synergy going into the future. He's not going to focus always on one goal or dream, but he's going to make it work so that all of his goals and dreams can work together when he wants to start something new. These two qualities are the building blocks of Walt's brand of synergy. So after moving all around the Midwest as a child, Walt gets the opportunity to strike it out on his own. And of course he tries a little bit in Kansas City first, but then he moves to Southern California. And this is where I think he finally decides that he's going to make this place his home. So he moved there, of course, to make it as an actor. Why else do so many people move to Hollywood? They want to make it as an actor. But of course, Walt wasn't cut to be an actor. That wasn't really what his skills were set at. He was decent at it, of course. He had fun doing it, but that wasn't the place that he was going to make it big. So he falls back on something that he did back in Kansas City, which was animation. The problem was animation was not happening in Hollywood. It was happening on the East Coast in New York. So really, if this was Elias would have gone from Kansas City to try to be an actor in Hollywood, and then probably would have moved to New York to be an animator. But Walt's not having that. He wants those roots. So he's going to stay put. He is going to make the most of this situation. He's in Hollywood. He's going to be an animator. He's going to stay there, and he's going to make it work for him. You're going to see making it work for him is kind of where his synergy comes from. When he makes it work for him in his own situation, that I think is where his synergy comes in. This is the first place we see Walt setting down some roots, but also indulging his restless nature. He moved there to be an actor. He's not going to be an actor. He's going to be an animator, but he's not going to move. This is the major difference we see between Walt and his father. So Walt's ambition is constantly evolving, but he doesn't give up his last ambition for a new one. That's a trend we're going to see throughout Walt's life here in Southern California. This is the core of Walt's synergy. he would find out how each new spark of creativity would grow from what he had built before and how he could incorporate it. So for instance, he starts making animated shorts. The Mickey Mouse ones are the first ones to really show the innovation with the sound synced to the picture. They blow up, they get really big. So he's able to branch out into experimental animation with the Silly Symphonies. He could keep making the Mickey Mouse shorts and people love them. And then he's got another place over here to keep making shorts, but experiment with some different things that he could then roll back into his Mickey Mouse shorts. Silly Symphonies become kind of an innovation lab. These two series of animated shorts become a great way to branch out into his feature animation. Of course, the first one being Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He takes a lot of the innovation from the Silly Symphonies to make Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and it is a smashing success. So now he doesn't just stop making animated shorts. He doesn't just stop innovating in Silly Symphonies, but he pushes forward. So now he's making animated movies, these animated feature films. He's making animated shorts. He's making all these different things. He's not losing any of the pieces of that puzzle that he's put together. He's just expanding on them. When the animated features kind of fall by the wayside because of different, world events like the Second World War, he doesn't stop there. He uses the shorts to make animated features in the package films. He uses his shorts and his animation to help give back to the United States and making a lot of promotional films and things like that for the war. He finds ways to use what he's got to make something new, and that's his synergy. Of course, he doesn't stay making animated feature films and animated shorts only. He's got to add to it. He adds live action films into the fold. He adds documentary into the fold with the True Life Adventures. And he's got all sorts of movies happening now. Now, we could even look at the company today. They haven't given up shorts. They haven't given up animated features. They still have live action features, and they still have documentary. It's all stuck around since it's began. It's all still there. He's expanding and expanding, using those other forms of media to help make the new forms and help him branch into the new forms of media. Each section of the company is making the new parts of the company stronger. So then we get to this point in the 1950s where all of this kind of comes together, and Walt does some weird things that most movie executives would not do. Television is becoming really popular, and he decides to get involved with television when a lot of the other studios in Hollywood are deciding not to even touch television because they think it's going to be their number one competitor. Walt decides to bring it in. Now, he doesn't just decide to bring television in. He's doing it for a very specific purpose because he also gets this idea of creating a theme park. Now, some people might go back to the idea of creating a theme park for Walt is him sitting on a bench watching his children go around a carousel. That's the story that gets told often. He watches this carousel and decides that, grown-ups should be able to go on the carousel with their kids. This is a great idea. I like this story. Walt was great at telling stories, but I think, truthfully, one of the main driving forces of Walt wanting a theme park is trains. He loved trains. That was his hobby, to have trains. He wanted to have bigger and bigger trains. And of course, Lillian, no matter if Walt named the train after her or not, Lillian did not, his wife did not want trains to get bigger and bigger at their home. So he had to find a different way to feed his hobby of trains. So of course, Walt Disney makes a theme park that has a train that runs around it. If you see, he could use these ideas to build up his hobbies too. So he wants these trains. He wants this park where parents and kids can play together. And he's got television. He's got his feature films. And he finds a way to make them all work together. Of course, he gets funding from ABC, the television broadcasting company. And they are going to give him some TV shows that he can use to promote not only his new park that he wants to make, because that's what the whole Disneyland show is based on, but he could also use it to promote upcoming movies that are coming to theater. He could use his old shorts and films to create programming for this television show that's going to promote his theme park. He can do it all. Everything kind of comes together at this moment. There's IP in the parks. There's movies on TV. It all comes together. It all promotes itself. It all makes a wonderful machine that starts to push and show what's happening across the entire company, and everything in that cycle is strengthening each other and making it more synergized and strong as a company. So of course, Walt could not just build his theme park, rest on his laurels, and leave it at that. So what Walt does is he comes up with the idea, probably because people were talking about how genius Disneyland was. There was a lot of talk about how great Disneyland was, and how it was a modern marvel of city planning and things like that. And this idea gets to Walt, and he decides that he's going to plan a city. He's going to call it Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And he decides to build this Epcot in Florida. So he's getting into city building. He goes from animated shorts all the way to building a city with a lot of stops in between, but never losing anything. He never says, I'm going to give up all of this other stuff to build a city. No, he's going to do all this other stuff and build a city. So Epcot, of course, never gets built in the way that Walt really intended for it to be built. It's a version of what he wanted to build, but it's not exactly what he wanted. He passes away before Epcot can get made. Now, you could go back and debate a lot of what, does Walt actually ever get it built the way that he originally intended, with all the red tape and things that the company would have to get through? We don't know. But what we do get is we get this Vacation Kingdom idea, a bigger version of Disneyland, with more space, so much space that the Disney Company can continue to build on it for years and years to come, with no intrusion from the outside. What was happening in Disneyland is all sorts of stuff started popping up from the outside. Things started, encroaching on the sightlines of Disneyland, and Walt didn't like that. So in this Florida project, he decides to buy all this land so that his city project and his Vacation Kingdom project can be a little more isolated from that outside area. So the Disney Company builds this Vacation Kingdom after Walt passes, and it's successful. It brings in the crowds. It brings in a lot of people. It keeps expanding and getting better over time. But it's not exactly what Walt was going for. If Walt would have stayed alive, if Walt would have lived longer, who knows what we would have seen in Florida, and how whatever he made, that next step, how that would have fed into his animation, his films, his shorts, how that would have fed into what he had done in the past, and how what he had done in the past would have made his new project stronger. We'll never know. But we do know that what we got with Walt Disney World is a great testament to Walt's synergy. It kind of uses all of those pieces that he's amassed throughout the years on a large scale, from his shorts to his theme park. We get all of it on a large scale in one area that is pretty much its own city. Whether or not it's a city like we think of it, like Walt wanted it to be, it's still a couple of cities actually full of the Vacation Kingdom that Walt had envisioned, just not the Innovation City Epcot part of it. So there's two artifacts that I want to look at that are really great when talking about the Walt Disney Company, especially at the end of Walt's life and just after. And those are these two synergy maps. One came out in 1957, and it shows all of the connections within the company, really, that Walt had set up. Creative talent and studios, theatrical films, right at the center of the company. And there's all this stuff around it and arrows that point to different segments like TV, like music, merchandise licensing, Disneyland, comic strips, publications, magazines. And this is in the 1957 one. And it's got quite a web of all the things that are connected across the company and how they're going to work together and how they're going to make it stronger. I'm going to put links to these maps. I'm going to put them up on my Twitter, put some links on my website so that you could see all of these connections that the company had even in that 1957 period. It's grown a lot since then. It even grew a lot into the 60s up until Walt passed away. So 10 years later, in 1967, the company releases another one of these synergy maps. This one is even more complicated than the one that came out in 1957, a decade before. This one does also come out the year after Walt passes, but you can see it as all of the things that Walt put together. This 1967 one really gets into this is the company that Walt Disney built. In the same thing, it's got Walt Disney Studio and the motion pictures in the center. Branching off of that, we've got different things like TV, we've got music, merchandise licensing, a lot of the same stuff as the first one, but we also have industrial films. We have Walt Disney World in Florida. We have WED, or Disney Imagineering, on the list. And the Mineral King project is listed on that one. There's so many pieces of this puzzle that show up just in that decade since the first synergy map was made that show all of the things that Walt helped build. And not just all of the things that Walt helped build, all of the things on this map are connected. Every single one of these are connected. This is Walt building the company with so much synergy that every part is helping hold up every other part of the company. Like I said, these two maps, I'm going to put them on my Twitter. I'm going to put them on my website. I'm going to link to the article where I found them. And you could take a look at all of those things in the synergy map yourself. And you could see how great the synergy that Walt set up in his company is, and how he built this wonderful thing from his from all of the ideas he's had over the year. Instead of starting new ones, completely different industries, he made sure that they all linked together, even if he was starting out in a whole different industry. So after Walt died, the company was without the leader that they were used to. We could see that they had this synergy map from 1967 that kind of shows them what to do with what they have. But from the first map to the second map in the last decade of Walt's life, we can see that there was a lot added with Walt Disney at the helm. But the question kind of after Walt passed away is, well, what do we do next? We don't have our leader. And that slowly became the phrase, what would Walt do? Well, would Walt do this? Would he make this movie? Would he make this Florida experience for Walt Disney World? What would he do? Doesn't have the same innovation that Walt actually had. It's just kind of thinking about his past decisions and making more decisions based on what he had already done. And that's not going to move the company forward. So even though they're left with a great synergy map and how all these things are connected, after Walt's passing, the company really kind of slows down. It doesn't have that same kind of booming growth that we see in the last decade of Walt Disney's life. Of course, that doesn't stay that way forever, even though the company is slowly running out of gas from what Walt left in the tank. There's another chapter of how synergy builds the company up, but that's for another episode. I'll continue to talk to you about the synergy of the Disney Company and how the Disney Company built up that power of synergy throughout the years and what different leaders of the company have done and added to that wonderful synergy map. But that story is a lot longer than one episode. So we'll look for some future episodes for that one. Subscribe. You'll be able to find it a lot more easily if you do. It's not going to be right up next in the chain of events here, but it's going to be coming at some point soon. Now, I just talked about Walt Disney. I had fun doing it. But I got to tell you, I didn't just know all that stuff. Of course, it took me a lot of time, years, reading about the company, reading about Walt, all these different places to come up with the stuff that I was talking about today. I don't think I've mentioned on this show enough, I'm a librarian. I love books. I love research. I'm especially a librarian who loves research. So I wanted to talk about some books that have been very, important to me in learning more and more about Walt Disney over the years. So I have a small list, the spotlight list. I'll talk about each one of these books. And then I'll also put some links to these books on my website, in the show notes, all the places, so that you could find them more easily yourself if you wanted to give them a read too. So these books about Walt that I really want to talk about, I'm going to start with the one that's endorsed by the Walt Disney Company. Bob Thomas's Walt Disney, an American Original, is one of those that pops up on the lists about Walt all the time, mostly because it is a Disney Editions book. It's endorsed by the Disney Company, and it tells the story of Walt's life from birth in Chicago all the way till when he passed away in the late 60s. It's all there. Some people might say it's not all there, but all of what the Disney Company wants you to know is there. And it's a great read. It's been published in a bunch of different forms. It's pretty easy to find out there. Bob Thomas is Walt Disney, an American Original. That's the first one on my list. Neil Gabler wrote a book about Walt Disney. That one's called Walt Disney, The Triumph of the American Dream. This one's a lot thicker than Bob Thomas's. And this one was kind of endorsed by the company at first, and then they kind of pulled their endorsement for it. There was some complaints about how Walt Disney was portrayed in it by his family members. So it tells a different side of the story. It's not all negative. It's not all positive. It just tells Walt's story in a different way than Bob Thomas did. I like both books. I like to read both. I think it's important to read multiple different sources on whatever subject you're reading about. So I would also recommend Neil Gabler's book, Walt Disney, The Triumph of the American Dream. If you don't like reading books, because this one's thick, I understand. I'm a librarian, but I understand some people would rather listen. I mean, both of those are audiobooks. Some people would either listen or watch to get their information. The Neil Gabler book actually inspired a PBS documentary as part of the American Experience, the series, The American Experience, Walt Disney. It's out there. You could get a DVD copy. You could stream it some places. It's another great place to learn more about Walt Disney. Even though I started talking about documentaries, I do want to talk about one more book that I think is really great, and that's Andrew Kiste's The Early Life of Walt Disney. This one's a little different because it only kind of focuses on his childhood, his early life, the formative years that helped bring him up to be the Walt Disney that we know. It doesn't get into his adulthood, his Disney career. It's about the early life. A lot of his stories of Marcelene, a lot of his stories of growing up, those things are in this book. It's a great book. Andrew Kiste has a lot of great books about the Disney Company, about the Disney parks, about Disney attractions, the World's Fair. I would recommend you go check him out. I'll put a link to his website. I'll put a link to his book, The Early Life of Walt Disney, all on my show notes on my website. You could go check those out, and you can see all those book recommendations I have for you. So thank you so much for taking a listen today and listen to me talk about Walt Disney, talk about synergy within the company, and talk all about those things that I love to talk about. So if you want more Synergy Loves Company, you can, of course, subscribe to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to it, there's usually a button. You just hit subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. If you want to learn more about my podcast, the YouTube channel that goes with it, or even any of the books that I talked about today or my other episodes, go on, take a look at synergylovescompany.com. That's the main place where you could find the podcast, links to YouTube, links to all those things I told you I was going to link to today They will be there. Take a visit to synergylovescompany.com. If you want to keep up with me, you can find me on Twitter at Eric H. Synergy. That is going to be all the stuff about the podcast, but all the stuff about whatever I'm tweeting about. And those are all those fun ways that you could keep in contact with me. Just drop by, tell me what you like, what you didn't like about the show. Twitter's the place to do that. I love it. And of course, thank you so much for giving this podcast a listen. I'll be back next time, maybe with a wonderful guest to keep me company with you. And we will talk about Disney and something else. But until then, thank you so much for keeping me company today. I had a great time. Hopefully you did too. Until next time, have a great day. I'll see you later.